Welcome back to the Aviation RC Noob Podcast. You found us. My name is Joe.
And I'm Matt.
We're here to be with you along your journey and to share our experiences in RC aviation. If you have any questions, thoughts, or want to share a flight story, hit us up at aviationrcnoob@gmail.com. Now, buckle in. Let's take off.
All right, it's episode 50. It's 55, right, Joe?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, that means we're talking about glide tests and the Flight Fest 2022 wrap up. So now that we're home,
Yeah, just a little bit because we talked about it while we were there.
Yeah, we did a good job of documenting kind of each day as we went. So it's more just now that we're home. Anything, maybe some talk about the trip briefly, and then kind of any thoughts that straggled. Maybe thoughts about future stuff, and a call out to our listenership to see if they can't help us create a better year next year.
All right. Well, before we get into it all, I'm not sure that we got to it last episode, and I don't know if we got to it the episode before that, but I want to take a second and thank our patrons. Who continue to help us keep the lights on, so that we don't have to worry about that. Specifically so that Matthew doesn't have to worry about that. As he is the one that has been paying for the website. So thank you, Matthew, but also thank you to our patrons.
Yeah, thank you, patrons, for helping us out and helping make this possible and make it so that we're excited to go forward. And hey, look, if you don't have money to lend, or you're not quite sure if we're worth putting in for patron, there's other ways to help. You could always spread the word. Honestly, I think right now that's always helpful. Just tell people about it. Share it in social media. Pass it to people who you think would enjoy it. People who have long commutes, people who you'd like to get excited about the hobby. I don't know that I like to think we're the guys that would get them excited about it, but I know we may not be the best choice. I think we will be. But anyway, if you enjoy it and you want, if you share it, that's a good way to help us out. And then of course, feedback. If you have ideas and thoughts, things you want to hear or see, reach out to us. Joe, they can reach out to me at Matthew@aviationrcnoob.com. And I know for Joe, it is Joe@aviationrcnoob.com, or you could reach both of us. How is that again? I think that's
aviationrcnoob@gmail.com.
That's it. And then we both get that one.
Mm-hmm.
And so either way, just reach out. Thank you for covering that. I know in our last, I don't know what I was entirely thinking, because I guess I was just excited to get, I knew after Flight Fest, I would want to build something I saw, right? Something that I was excited about when we were at Flight Fest. So I had set up a build night for the 4th of July weekend. I think it was July 1st we had set it up. And so I think I built a Flurkin. Pretty sure I finished it up while we were all talking.
Was that what you were building that night?
I think so. Honestly,
okay.
I built like 3 or 4 different planes in the last week or 2. So I can't remember. I think that's what I was building then. But we had a number of people come out, and we appreciate everybody who came out. Plus, I've been online building, and so when I'm sitting around doing that, I'll kind of reach out in our build forum and say, "Hey, anybody else building? Come on in. I'll be sitting in the video chat while I build what I'm working on." And every once in a while, we'll have people come out. So, chat to a couple people.
I know I popped in, I think for a few minutes there. I don't think I was printing.
Yeah, that was. Printing. Let's talk about that.
I don't think I was. No, that came out wrong because I'm looking at the software in front of me. I don't think I was building that night. I don't remember what I was doing.
It doesn't matter. You just came in to say hey, and I think we were running a couple of thoughts back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
And just supporting, just saying, hey, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Yeah. So then I guess we're back to what have we been up into the hobby? And then that's kind of like the wrap up of Flight Fest 22.
Mm-hmm.
The trip back. I think it was pretty uneventful.
It certainly was for me. I slept all of it.
Yeah, Joe slept almost the entire ride. He woke up to get food or whatever it was we had stopped to get. And then when we got back on the road, he was fast asleep in the sidecar. But you did get a chance to play that airplane game yourself.
I did. And I did drive for about an hour.
You did. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry I didn't drive more.
No, you started out for a couple hours knowing that you would, when we finished, would have to get back on the road and continue for a couple more hours. Jesse and I shared the trip home. But yeah, no, it was pretty uneventful, and everything came back intact pretty quickly. And I think we unloaded that van ridiculously fast.
Oh, yeah.
It was.
Yeah, it didn't take us long to get everything out of it.
No, I was impressed. So, yeah. It was.
And then the battery in my Prius died. Because somehow I left one of the inside lights on.
I feel like that was karma.
Why?
Well, for the time you left the van lights on, I had to get it jumped when we were at Flight Fest.
I don't know that I'm the one that left that light on.
Somebody did. It wasn't me.
Are you sure?
Yeah. Very positive on that one. Okay. It doesn't matter.
Fact is, left that light
it's
on.
Okay. It was easy enough. Like the van was right there. Once you got started, you were good to go. So that was easy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing that we noticed, I guess, what were kind of the postmortems on Flight Fest now that we kind of came back. Mine was Bill the Flurkin. They're a lot of fun. Just by watching so many people put them into the air and kind of see what they did to make it fly right. I think was a big help. I think if I were doing it on my own, I don't know that I would have trusted the CG marks. Because I guess it must be a blended body, like a blended lifting body as well as the wings. So the CG point is literally like at the very front point of where the wings come into the body.
Yeah, well,
it's really far forward.
Yeah, I thought was it there or was it at the front of the wingtip where it sweeps forward? Was it not quite that far forward?
It's not quite. It's pretty close though. I mean, it's really at the front edge of that wing. And
it really surprised me.
Yeah, and I promise you need you need like a 3300 4-cell battery to balance it out too. I'm like, oh, that's awful heavy, but it put a decent motor in there, the CPAC on like a 9x6 or something like that, and it'll cook. Mm-hmm. And it'll fly great. And mine, I built one in the week after. I know you had a kit. I was kind of expecting that you might be building Hog Wild on that yourself. But I know you have. Yeah, I know you have the kit that Jesse bought.
Yeah, I got Jesse's kit.
Yeah.
Which, thank you, Jesse.
Yeah, thank you.
No, I'm trying to think. We got back. I think it was that week, and then I had LARP that weekend, maybe.
Yeah. Well, there's a 4th of July weekend, and then the following weekend.
Okay.
Was LARP, right? This past one, which is only a couple days ago. So the week after the 4th was LARP. The holiday weekend, you were probably visiting family or friends. Mm-hmm. And so that was busy. Yeah, so there wasn't a whole lot of weekend free time.
No. And so as far as building as such goes, nothing on my front.
No.
Although I did get maybe that night we were doing where you were doing the build party, I hopped on and was playing with my Tiny Whoop. Maybe that's what it was.
Okay, that might have been it.
I know I brought the Tiny Whoop out. It was flying it in my driveway at stupid dark.
God, what are you doing? Are you trying to lose it?
Well, I mean, I didn't. I mean, I kept tanking it, but I didn't lose it. I'd have to get up and go walk for it, but I always brought it, fairly close back. Yeah,
I think you could set yourself up a pretty good little racetrack in your backyard.
I could, if I could get control of the thing first. I just got to do some practicing.
Welcome to the first hurdle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, got to play with the Tiny Whoop some. only just tonight got the microphone installed back in the computer, so we can sit down and record. And between last time we spoke and now, so I guess between Flight Fest and now, I've got a Ender 3 3D printer. Basically the same one you got, but you got the Pro version, I think.
Yeah, it's mainly because the ANET A8, which I started with, was just loud. And I was like, wait, they make a Pro where it's real quiet? I was planning on having it kind of in our recreational space. So in the dining room, like living room area, enough where when I'm sitting to watch a movie, what I don't want to hear is the motors going back and forth a bunch.
Right.
So I was like, I'll pay for the Pro. Like, really, it's just and it's all it is the drivers are a newer. Somebody figured out how to make the drivers make less noise through.
Well, you've got
like the
you've
hardware,
got the newer
boards.
drivers, and you've got the secondary X-axis screw, right?
Yeah, and that's more just for, I'll call it repeatability. It tends to help a little bit, but I mean, it's not going to make it any quieter.
No, but it helped prevent a problem that I had.
Well, sure.
Which was my X-axis drooped on the non-screw side because something got loose. Threw my bed all out of level.
It is also not easy, but it is possible to screw one side and not the other, which would set the whole thing out of whack and cause you to have to re-level either the bed or the arm. So it is still, with two screws, you can still have it off. So that's easy enough to do. Because, I mean, those motors don't resist a ton. They're not like locked in when they're not on. You know, you can still adjust them. So, so anyway, but yeah. I mean, those are the two features that make it the Pro. It was the quiet that I was in for.
Yeah.
For the extra, whatever it was.
I didn't think these motors were that loud when I first got it. But as time's going by, they've got a little volume to them. So I may I may look into upgrading the drivers at some point in the future.
How are they compared to the fan motor? Like right now, the loudest thing on mine is the fan. And it's not loud, but it's loud enough.
I never hear the fan.
Okay. So
well, I say that. I hear the power supply fan.
Okay.
But the other little hot end fans, I don't hear those. But yes, the power supply fan, I hear that. In fact, it's why I had to make sure it was turned off before we got recording, because my microphone would have picked it up.
Well, that's okay. Disclaimer from here on forward. Joe's background noise might contain 3D printing. We're going to have to cut that out and put that at the front of every episode.
Maybe. I mean, it just depends on what's going on.
Yeah, right. I would hate to have you like pause a print. That's like a 4-day print when you're trying to make a plane or something.
Well, that was just poor planning.
You know what I'm talking about, though. Well, I've made prints that were 24 hours.
Yeah, I mean, I just did a print that was 32 hours. And, I had to let it, I started it, Sunday evening, and just got it done, anyway, whatever it was.
So were you printing another printer?
No, I was printing a wall, terrain wall for 40K for my buddy to see how that worked out.
Nice. Yeah, when you have tabletop hobbies and this RC hobby, the 3D printer is really indispensable.
Oh yeah.
What impressive.
Yep. So been just playing around with a bunch of different stuff with that. I've tried to print my D&D mini. I've printed terribly because I was trying to print so many minis very quickly, basically in a day for that Monday night for my D&D group. So those were terrible prints, but I shoved them through.
Not as simple as you imagined in your head, right?
It's like just more time consuming.
Yeah. In my head, I was like, I'll just do the thing and print and it'll be great. And I was like, there's more to this. A lot more to this. No, when you get the settings right, it's hubba hubba. Some of those look really amazing.
Well, I've not had a whole lot of trouble out the gate. Basically, the only real problem I've had is that my bed got out of alignment. And because I was telling myself, I haven't touched the bed, I didn't want to go to my bed's out of alignment. And it wasn't my bed, but where that X-axis crossbeam dropped, and the nozzle was dragging the hotbed.
That's the worst noise.
So it was, yeah.
And you're like,
but it was clogging the thing. And I mean, when I first came to it, it was, 3/4 through the way of a, I don't know, several hour print. And the nozzle was a couple inches up above where it had finished, like where it quit printing.
Because
it
it's
had
printing
drugged
nothing.
and worn.
Yeah,
There's a blob of so plastic. Much. Yep, and it had drug and wore so much, and it wasn't feeding. I was like, "What is going on here?" And I'm looking, and it had actually the filament feeder had actually ground through the filament.
Oh boy. Yeah,
because it just got blocked,
and it's also hot end, so it's hot and it's sort of partially melting it as we go.
No, I mean the extractor gear.
Oh,
the extruder gear.
Oh, okay. So it was it had worn it smooth. Okay,
it wore it smooth and all the way through the filament, where the filament popped into two pieces because it just couldn't feed it because it had basically cut it.
Yeah, nothing left. So, welcome to 3D printing, my friend. Welcome to a new hobby.
Hey, you know what? So far, it's been a good experience, and I've not had really any troubles other than, again, my X-axis drooped.
Yeah, I was going to say, once you learn the quirks of that model, I think, and it sounds like you learned probably all the big ones, you'll be in good shape. I have to say, the Ender was the most hands-off. Not that I've had a ton to deal with, but based on what I've heard from different people, the Ender 3 seems to be a pretty hands-off model. They seem to finally get it all set so that you can just pull it out of the box and print for a while. And then, with a little bit of just making sure it's aligned, you'll have success for a while.
Yeah. Like I said, I've minimal problems to the point that, you and I have just downloaded plans for the Eclipson, a couple of Eclipson planes, and we're going to start printing those out slowly.
Yeah, we're going to try our hand at some 3D printing. I've got some lightweight PLA. Actually, I've got not just some, I've got a giant, 10 kilogram roll or whatever the heck they sold. There was the small size and the giant size, and they were out of the small. And I'm like, you know what? When I get this working right, I'm going to be printing for a while, and I'm probably going to be printing a lot. So, okay, bring on the big roll.
Fair enough.
Go ahead. What?
No, I was saying fair enough because I couldn't see buying that much filament.
Yeah, I looked at a couple of things. I'm like, ooh, they make a Prandtl D-Wing. I want to try that one. And then there's ooh, this one's a quickie. There's a model of a quickie. I want to build that one. Ooh, and that one. And ooh, what's that over there? I want to build one of those.
Yeah, okay.
And all of a sudden it's there's 6 or 7 planes I want to build that are the 3D printed ones, just to try them out and see how they work. So there's a lot of positive reviews. So I think that's in our near future. So as a listener, you can look out for that. I know the things I've been doing. I printed out the Flerken 3D printed parts. And when you were coming through from LARP, I printed you out almost a complete extra set because I knew you had the Flerken, but you may or may not have had the parts. So I was like, why don't you check them out? So I was surprised they worked out really well. Seem to have the same kind of function and flex as, I guess, the plywood parts. So that's pretty cool. They do a good job of kind of holding everything together. I flew the Dollar Tree foam board Reptile Dragon 2 again at my home field on a 6S and had a blast just zooming it around. Unfortunately, the FPV footage I checked out is kind of in and out. So there's no real continuous like low passes. I got to figure out what's going on with that. It seemed like maybe the battery was shifting, and when it shifted, it'd be a loose connection. So it would disconnect the power, and then it would shift back and it would reconnect the power to the camera.
Okay.
So, I mean, it was recording. So it was on and off and on and off and on and off. And then I'm glad I didn't have my goggles on. And that was part of the reason why I do that. It's like until I get a solid image. And again, it's a little all-in-one, like TX06 or something. So I'm not, I'm not too terribly upset about it. I'm trying to figure out how the heck to wire up the like run cam to the RX on like a little backpack thing that I kind of put in there. And if that starts losing power and stuff and does the same thing, I'll start getting unhappy. So the Flurkin that flew well out of the hand. Like it just was ready to go. And I flew a couple batteries through. I even was doing it high inverted, and that was doing well. And it just really flew, however I wanted. You know what I mean? Like it was just easy to fly around, and it was a lot of fun. It looked great. I got a lot of like, what in the world is that thing? That's really cool looking. So, and it's sturdy too. Like I'm really surprised like how sturdy it is. It's not just this, I mean, it looks kind of like this football shape, and you'd imagine that it might not be as maybe as stiff, pardon me, or rigid. But it seemed to be actually pretty sturdy, to the point where I was flying inverted lower. And as always for me, I went up, which is down into the dirt and it goes straight into the tobacco and into the soft field. And it, it only had like a little wrinkled like pig nose now. But that was it. Like I mean, it hit pretty hard. And I was surprised that it didn't have more damage. That would be as simple as basically either, recutting out a nose section and regluing that up. That would be really simple and easy to do, but I could fly it just as it is. I'm trying to remember something that happened where I was like, yeah, you know what? Rather than push it, let me just take it home and fix it proper. Because I want to fly this some more. I want to fly it soon, so it's like, let me take it home and get it right. And in the meantime, I've been working at stiffening up the motor supports in the Dark Star. I haven't really sat down and dedicated time to that. I should, so that I could move it off of the table. It's taking up the whole table. But I also, before Flight Fest, I had been talking to Jesse. He's my troublemaker. He and I were throwing out all the weird birds, all the weird planes. And we were looking at the Payen collection. So Roland Payen, he's like a French aviator from the 1930s, 1920s, 30s, somewhere in there. And he had this like kind of front canard wing, almost like a parallel wing deal where it was like I guess the front was effectively acting like a canard. It was like a flying wing up front, and it was like a delta in the back. So if you want to,
okay,
it almost looks like a triangular back end with spread wings up front. I don't know how else to describe it. You just have to look up. I ended up basically designing, because it looked like the fuse was pretty much like like a rolled over triangle. And I was like, well, that'd be really kind of easy to do. So pretty minimal. And I figured out how to put it on like 2 sheets of foam board, and it's a pretty good size model. But I ended up making a model of the Payen PA 240. Now this guy was prolific too. Like I've never seen such a large collection of variations on the theme as what this guy put together. It's a flying ambulance. So the design is kind of like with the GB, with like the little cockpit right near the tail, right?
Okay.
So he's got something similar to that, but underneath the flying wing up front. I call it the flying wing, but it's like the canard wing up front, which is almost the size of like a regular wing. he has there's a stretcher in the fuse right behind the engine. And there's like a little side loading base where you can basically put an injured passenger in there, close it up and take off and get behind enemy lines, I guess, or get back behind to safety and, get medical help. It's a weird looking little plane. Maybe we'll cover it in a history section coming up, but it's neat. And the model came together quickly, and I'm really pleased with it so far. Right now I'm cutting in doors and doing the final glazing, put in windows and stuff like that. Trying to figure out how I want to paint it. So it runs on like a B or a C pack, and it's, like any Delta wing, kind of where you just have ailerons. It has a rudder, so I'll include a rudder with it. But otherwise, okay. I'm curious to see how it flies. But that kind of when I was trying to figure out, there's no clear markings where CG is. Anytime I'm not really sure where that kind of thing is, and even when I am, I just double check it with a glide test. And I think that's what our main topic is going to be today. We're going to talk about why the glide test, how to get to it, and how to use it to your advantage.
Transition. Yeah, good transition. I saw you set that up and you spiked it.
I suppose so. And like I said, we'll do that after we go through our history segment, and we'll talk about why we're doing our history segment in a minute. And then last thing I did was I started piecing together the Star Citizen Eclipse. Again, I talked to Jesse. Every time I go to talk to him, like almost about 10 minutes ago, he was on playing Star Citizen. Like, it's a new sci-fi based game, but the sci-fi games have some really cool looking, typically fighters. Most of them are space based, but some of the fighters are, they're like planet side fighters. So they have a bit of aerodynamics to them. So they look like they might actually be able to be made into a full flying model without just being a chunk of foam being thrown and enough power,
Right.
So I started on the Star Citizen Eclipse, which is like the stealth bomber looking one. So okay. I'm going to make a 50 millimeter EDF version of it. So yeah. So, and that's making some progress, but it's more like the kind of roughshod, let's get the bulk forms together method. It's not like the let's look at the 3 view, make a polished model, and just fold it up and hope it all works. It's more like, well, this is sort of chunky this way. Let's make this and a top and a bottom, and let's add some pieces on the side here. And then, when you're done, it's like, okay, now let's unfold this. Take a picture of that, because that's the shape we want. That's what
right.
That's what the final shape on the plan should be. So I'm doing more of that kind of stuff. That's more of a longer version as far as the build process. So, but it's been fun. I'm liking what I'm seeing so far. It'll have to wait until after vacation. This next coming week I'm on vacation, so I'll finish it up when I get back. All right. I guess
that's right. You're going to go pick up your boys, right?
Yeah. As with every summer, since their mother and I split, they're with their mother during the summer. They're with me during the school year. And, but that leaves me with no time to have, vacation fun time. So I go and grab them 1 week, and we go do something. Oftentimes it's go visit grandparents. The 1 year we did grandparents and Flight Fest. This year we're going to go to DC. So it should be fun.
That'll be fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My oldest is 13 and he's learning about American history and how government works and different styles of governments and stuff like that. So this is kind of where it might actually, have an impact, and he'll have like okay, that's what all this is.
Mm-hmm.
And my youngest, I think he'll enjoy it. Time. Yeah, I think so. Should be fun. All right, so that brings us around to our history segment. Do you remember why we're doing this plane? What plane is it, Joe?
Well, you said you were going to look up the Betty Bomber.
The Betty Bomber. It's the Mitsubishi G4M. Do you know why we're doing it this week?
Because there was 2 of them at Flight Fest.
There was 2 of them, one of which was 200%, and it was our co-camper, Ethan. He'd put together the 200% version of it, which was, what was that, like 12 feet or something? 10 feet?
It was big.
It was big.
It was ridiculous.
And it flew great too. It's cool. So in honor of that, and as we close up our Flight Fest chapter this year, I figured it would be a good time to kind of highlight this model, and and as a nod to our former, our past guest, and I imagine our future guests. At some point here, we'll probably have them come back on. Is Jack and Steve Niezgoda. Jack had put together, I think, on a request from the RC Roundtable guys, Terry Dunn and his crew over there.
Really?
Fitz and Lee Ray. Fitz was like, "Ooh, man, you can make those things that nobody ever wants to make. Could you make one of these Betty bombers? They're so awesome." And, Jack was like, "Heck yeah, I've been looking at that for a while." He just gave me the push I needed, right? So he ended up making one, and it was pretty cool. So, while we were at Flight Fest, they had theirs, and Ethan had his, and they flew together in the sky for a while. Actually, Ethan probably could have flown his for another 20 minutes. He had some massive battery in there. It's really cool. But so let's talk about the Betty Bomber, what it was and how it was, because it was one of these, it's a Japanese aircraft made by the Mitsubishi company. It's a twin engine, land-based, medium range bomber. So, it wasn't like it was on an aircraft carrier or anything like that. It was originally started out the war, by basically its first missions were to go to mainland China in 1940, in September of 1940. And 27 of them went, and they departed from Taipei, Amura, and Jeju City, and they attacked Hankow. And that was basically the beginning of, and these aircraft were then, escorted by A6M-0s. And basically they went on their first attack run to China, and kind of opened up, I guess, the beginning of the war there. And then they followed it. Then they went to Luzon, crossed the Luzon Strait, and they began bombing into the Philippines. So that is where some of the Allied bases were. I know that was one of the things that America had made a strong base in the Philippines, I believe, as well as, I think it was England, Great Britain at the time, and some of the Australian FAR bases were in the Philippines. So, and then, it was basically the very beginning of the Japanese invasion into the Southwest Pacific theater. So, so this thing was called, let's see, its official designation was Mitsubishi Navy Type 1 Attack Bomber. It was commonly referred to by the Japanese Navy pilots as the Hamaki, or which is, I'm trying to say guitar. I'm not trying to say that. I'm trying to say cigar. Every time it comes out the other way. So it's called the cigar or the leaf roll, which is basically because the main fuselage is a cylindrical, tapered, rounded end shape, which is similar to, cigars. And because of that, it was, and then the other reason why they called it a cigar was because it had a penchant for igniting after it got hit. And we'll talk about that in a second. But the Allied forces deemed it, and they named it the Betty. I'm not really sure why. They're not really, that's just what they called it. They call it the Betty. That was their designation. So
I'd be curious as to why they chose that particular name.
Right. Me too. And I'm not really, there's nothing in the brief. I watched a handful of videos, and I've read a couple of the different summaries. And I think it's just when every plane had It had like its official name, right? But it had a common name that it was designated by that we could nickname it.
Yeah, but those nicknames would have
they'd have
a reason behind them.
Yeah, I don't know what. That might be worth a whole. That might be worth a whole show. Like how does that happen, right? Not a whole show, a whole history segment.
Maybe.
Yeah. So the interesting thing, there's a couple interesting things about this bomber. One, it was in service at the beginning of the war, right? At the beginning of the Japanese inclusion in World War II. And it was also in service and in use all the way through the very end of the war. And we'll talk about its significance at the end of the war because it has a really special role in that. But let's talk about its design. One of the things that it was designed to be light. And so what they did is that it wasn't armored. And so
Seems
it was
like
really
a terrible choice for a bomber.
Yeah, I guess maybe they wanted it to have very good performance. So they wanted to be able to be maneuverable and have excellent range. And to do that, you need to make it light. And so to make it light, one of the ways is to keep the structure light. Don't have they skimped on self-sealing fuel tanks. They also put the fuel tanks in the wings, I guess to make space for other cargo. And so they also included no armor plating for the crew or any of the fuel tanks. So what they found was it started to become a severe drawback and caused a lot of heavy losses because the Allied fighters started to nickname this the Flying Lighter or the Zippo. Because what it would do is they would go and they just strafe the wings, and if the fuel tanks got hit, they would catch fire. And because there's no armor and there's no way to seal it back up, it would just basically catch fire and it would go down. And so it started to get that name of those nicknames of the Flying Lighter or the Zippo. Or this, and it was also aptly named the cigar, but I mean the whole goal was that a way it could go long range and reach the Philippines and come back from the land base, and that way it didn't have to like stop on another island somewhere else, and it was fairly maneuverable. It's just it was also prone to devastating failure with the right kind of attacks. So. It was also one of the most widely produced and most famous bombers that were operated by the Japanese in World War II. It served in nearly all the battles during the Pacific War. The aircraft is also known for being the mothership that carried the Yasuko MXY-7 Oka, which is a purpose-built anti-ship suicide weapon. It was basically like a flying torpedo. And so it would be manned. And so they would then fly it directly into, because you didn't really have any guidance systems in those days. So what they would do is they would get a pilot who would volunteer to steer the torpedo into the battleships or into the ships and fly it kamikaze style.
Yeah, the kamikaze guys, even since I was real young, have always fascinated me that somebody would step up to fill that role.
Yeah. Yeah, it's quite a mindset that I guess we Americans really haven't had a need to do, I guess. Mm-hmm. I can only imagine how things felt from the Japanese point of view. I imagine it, there's a different mentality of how to be and what it meant to be a citizen of your country.
All for the emperor.
Right. And it was a great honor to volunteer for that service. So it's a different mindset. And so I guess hats off to those brave and, what I would see as crazy people, but I mean, whatever. That's an incredible role to play. But yeah, you'll see in the Niezgoda's model, they actually have like a little Oka in their model. So if you build one, they'll have plans for that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's in there. I'm just trying to think. I believe. We'll have a link in the description. But as I understand it, why is that not? That link isn't going anywhere. That's disappointing. All right. Well, anyway, it's a link, but it doesn't do anything. All right. But we'll have a link to it. Yeah, they have the little model in there. If you look at the picture, and so yeah, it was a torpedo bomber, and that was one of the things that surprised the Allied forces. Was that they had the arrogance of saying, "There's no way that the bombers and the fighters are going to do anything to our fleet. We can just go and attack without with immunity, right? Like these are just a nuisance." That's all they are. They're never really going to do any damage. But what they didn't realize is these bombers were very effective. And they just had such a payload that one of the first couple battles the Allied forces came in with the arrogance, the battle turned pretty bad, pretty quick, with the Japanese winning, because they sunk a handful of ships that the Allied forces just didn't think was ever going to happen. And they carried torpedoes as one of their favorite armaments. So, yeah, very interesting. Anyway, so and then let's talk about their role at the end of the war, right? So they had service throughout the entire Pacific theater, and from the very beginning of the war to the very end. And so after U.S. Army General Douglas MacArthur instructed the Japanese to send emissaries to Manila to arrange the formal surrender, and it would bring with them all of Japan's defensive plans and whatever was included in that surrender. As part of the negotiations, 2 demilitarized Japanese G4Ms, given call signs Bataan 1 and Bataan 2, they were sent to the Lashima, carrying the first surrender delegations on the first leg of their flight to Manila in the Philippines. So they were painted with surrender markings, white with green crosses, and they were escorted by American P-38 Lightning fighters. The paint scheme was ordered by General MacArthur to verify that the planes were in fact carrying the delegates. That way they didn't get shot down. Restart a bunch of things to make sure everybody was getting through this successfully. And on August 19th, 1945, 2 Betty Bombers took off from Tokyo with the Japanese delegation. Both of the planes were kept under close watch by constant U.S. Army Air Force escorts due to the concern that the delegates might attempt some sort of kamikaze mission under the color of a flag of truce. And then 2 B-25J Mitchells with the 345th Bombardment Group and 2 other flying backups were monitoring the flight. They provided top cover where 6 P-38 Lightnings and 8 and the 80th Fighter Squadron. The Japanese landed in Lashima Airfield at 12:40 in front of a large crowd of Americans gathered to witness their arrival. Once the planes landed in Shima, the delegates were transferred to the U.S. Army Air Force C-54 Skymaster for the final leg of the flight to Manila to meet with MacArthur to work out the details of the surrender. The 2 Bettys remained in Lashima to transfer the delegations back after the Manila meeting. Both planes were reportedly destroyed either by accident or planned scrapping shortly afterwards. So, there was in this article there was a photo of the delegation during the surrender. So, and we'll have I'll see if I can have a link to that article, as well as we pulled some information from the wiki, including the general characteristics. So basically, how big and so let's go through that. It had a crew 7, which was a pilot, a co-pilot, a navigator, bombardier, nose gunner, a captain, top turret gunner, a radio operator, waist gunner, an engine mechanic, waist gunner, and a tail gunner. So pretty much, if you weren't piloting, you were operating a gun on top of your other duties.
Like.
And if you look at the plane, like there's it's bristling with machine guns out every side. So, I mean, it's not like it wasn't a well-defended ship. It's just it had that flaw of a non-self-sealing. So basically, with a self-sealing tank, if it caught fire, it would seal back up and extinguish the fire, right? Normally, but because they didn't have those on these ships or on this aircraft, it didn't happen. Okay, so it was about 65 feet or almost 20 meters long. It had an 81-foot or 82-foot wingspan, it was about 25 meters. It was almost 5 meters high, which is about 16 feet in the rigging position, which is kind of where the radio comes up to the tail, if I recall right. The wing area was 840 square feet. If you want to get all excited and figure out the wing loading, I'm sure it's pretty interesting. It used 2 different airfoils. Actually, it had a modified version of the MAC 118 airfoil. So it was 12.5% in the root out to a 10% at the tip, which basically just says
now, what's that?
It moves the thick part of the wing cord forward. So the 10% is like at the 10% from the leading edge.
Okay.
So it started out at 12.5 and then
alphanumeric that you read off?
The MAC 118. So
now,
that's the
airfoil
of
that one?
Designation.
Okay.
11 it's not a NACA number. So the NACA, the normal airfoil numbers, each one has a specific characteristic in the wing, like how thick the cord is compared to how thick the cord is compared to its length, where that thickness lays, if there's any camber. That's typically what those numbers represent.
Mm-hmm.
But as they're the same airfoil, they just kind of shift a little bit. So the empty weight was almost 15,000 pounds. The gross weight was almost 21,000 pounds. So you have a useful payload of almost 6,000 pounds or 3 tons. The max takeoff was 28,000 pounds. So that's it could be really heavily loaded. It was powered by 2 Mitsubishi Mk4A Kasai 11 14-cylinder air-cooled radial piston engines. They produced 1,530 horsepower each at takeoff. And they produced at 6,500 feet, they produced 1,410 horsepower, and at 13,000 feet, which is, I imagine, the cruising altitude, it produced 1,340 horsepower. So they were pretty powerful. And then
no kidding.
It had 3-blade Hamilton standard licensed Sumitomo constant speed variable pitch propellers. So the pitch rotated so it twisted as the blade went out, but it was designed to go. It wasn't designed to change, I guess, attitude as the speed increased. They were constant pitch, or they're variable pitch, but they were constant speed.
Constant speed, so constant RPM, variable pitch to adjust the speed of the airplane.
Okay. Again, I probably have it backwards in my head. So I'll just trust you on that. It's a constant speed variable pitch. So, I mean, obviously the motors are not.
At least that's
what
that means
speed.
in my head.
So what you do is you select your propeller for the speed you're most likely to cruise at, and that way it's the most efficient at that speed. And I just think that rather than have like a flat paddle, effectively it twists so it's most efficient across its length for that speed. But, whereas like some, you can actually change the angle of the blades as you change the speed. And I don't know if that's what this is. I don't know. I'm so confused. I'm going to leave it to that. Look it up.
Constant speed variable
pitch. You look that up and tell us about it after I get through this the last bits of performance and guns here. So it could go 260 miles an hour at 13,000 feet, 13,700 feet, which is 428 kilometers per hour. Its cruise speed was 196 miles an hour, or 170 knots, at almost 10,000 feet. So that's 316 kilometers per hour. Its stall speed was 75 miles per hour, or 65 knots, which isn't a whole lot different than most commercial airplanes, or not commercial, but like a Cessna. You basically landed at, I guess it's at 40 knots is where it kind of stalls out, but not a whole lot different. Its range was 1,772 miles, or 1,540 nautical miles. Let's see. Its rate of climb was 1,800 feet per minute. Actually, pretty significant. The puppy could go straight up, pretty much. So it was armed with. This may be a minute because there's a lot of armaments here. It was, and obviously there were variations on this theme. Like this kind of goes without saying. Like there were a great number of variations, but look it up for yourself and see which one was the most popular. I'm not going to cover it here, but the guns were one 20 millimeter Type 99 cannon. That's the tail turret. There were 4 7.7 millimeter Type 92 machine guns. That was the nose turret and the waist, two waist positions and the top turret. It could carry one 2,000-pound bomb, 1,900-pound bomb, Type 91 Kai 3, which is improved Model 3 aerial torpedo, or one 1,800 kilogram or 1,760-pound bomb, or 4 250 kilogram or 550-pound bombs. So depending on the mission, they could put some serious firepower in there. Do you get any information on the constant speed variable pitch?
There's actually a lot of information on it.
Yeah. So how about this? Do the blades rotate?
Yes.
As in, like, they change pitch as you fly?
Yes.
Or are they... Okay.
They do.
Okay.
Any propeller is going to have a change in the pitch.
Right.
Along its length.
Correct. Because the speed of the propeller sections are different based on how far they out from how far they are out from the center.
Right.
So the tips are running much faster than the inside, so you can get away with the different pitch.
Right. So the variable pitch part of that prop, the props will rotate along the blade so that they bite more or less. It is not a constant speed in that you only ever set one engine RPM and leave it. You still have throttle control, but it's a mixture of throttle control and it's a mixture of engine RPM and the propeller pitch for different situations to get the results you want. I mean, we could do a segment on that sometime.
Yeah, I think that might be worth going through. I'm going to leave that one to you. Apparently, I can't wrap my brain around it well enough, but it would be really helpful to know because they are available. You know what I mean? Like right now, I think we have set pitch propellers pretty much is what we typically use, but you can purchase variable pitch propellers. Like it is possible.
Can we really? For RC?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, they cost a bit and they're for the larger models, but they're available. So it may be worth talking about.
Well, I will try to throw a history segment together sometime.
Nice.
Or an explanation section, maybe not so much a history section.
Right. But it goes in that same spot. Cool.
Yeah.
So I mean that was his significance. So it's a bomber, and that's seems kind of rare, honestly, when you look at how fast the how fast the upgrades to these models came out when we were looking at the Spitfire, and the Spitfire quickly became obsolete. So they had this one, and then they went to the next model. And the role of these models, if they did carry through the war, through the entire length, would change from forward fighter to support role to, hey, we use this to ferry people back and forth and train them, right? And it seems like this bomber was active and functional the entire war, which is pretty rare.
Okay.
And pretty interesting. So yeah, take a look at some videos, because there's some really good documentaries on this plane specifically, and it really kind of holds a unique place. And again, I only touched the very beginning and the end, but it was because it was involved throughout the whole war. There's a lot more information on its effect, role, and purpose throughout the war and how it changed. So take a look. We'll have some links in the bottom of the show description, so look for them.
And Jack and Steve, they've got plans released for the Betty Bomber.
Mm-hmm. Yes, they do.
Okay. We should include links to those plans as well.
Already there. Already at the bottom.
Oh, all right. Look at you.
Yeah, it's now I don't know why it's not. The link isn't active, but we'll get it. We'll get it there.
Okay. If nothing else, go by the 13th Squadron and
look it up.
It's under have G4M. It on their main website.
Sorry, it's under G4M Betty Bomber. Cool. All right. Well, I guess that brings us to our main topic.
Yeah, tell me about glide tests, because I don't do them.
Well, after watching the nonsense that we did with the Dark Star, I say it's nonsense because we're having fun with it, and it's just such a big, unwieldy plane to try to figure out. So we did a glide test on that, and we talked about it last time. And the point of the glide test is if you are not certain where it's going to balance and fly properly, you have to figure it out. I mean, the other option is to just put the full throttle in and send it and hope.
True.
And, if you have a rough idea, most of the time it's halfway out the wing at the 25% mark towards the leading edge of the plane. If you can get it to balance there, it'll probably fly okay. But on some planes, it's not the case. Like the Flurkin, not the case. The Dark Star, definitely not the case, because the entire thing is a lifting body. It's also designed for supersonic speeds and not entirely, not that it doesn't fly in subsonic speeds, but the flight mechanics are very different. But there's a number of planes that are very much that way, where you're just like, well, I think it should go here. Or you think you have it close, but you want to test it to make sure you have it dead right. Especially if you're going to put full throttle and send it. What you don't want to do is have it go and doink right into the dirt, and that kind of ends your fun for the day.
Now, we should probably preface this to say that this is primarily for builds that you're kind of designing yourself, because most of the printed plans, like you're going to get from Flight Fest or from the Hangar RC, or even if you're building balsa, which I guess I would hope you weren't doing a glide test with balsa, but I guess.
Well, I mean, you can still do. No, they still do it. I mean,
okay.
So the CG is what it should be, but and it's usually what the designer has found was successful. But I have also noticed that some plans, the designer said, it should be about here, put it on the plans, and then tested it and adjusted, and then it flew fine, but they never went back and adjusted that CG. So the CG on the plans may be a little off, or there's more wiggle room in there, like you built yours differently a little bit than theirs. So yours is going to be flying a little different than theirs. So your CG point might be a little different than what's on the plans. So you want to just test it. It's more just be sure. And flying wings are really sensitive to where the balance point is, right? So if you want to see if it's going to fly, you get it close to the CG point. You get like, this is where it should balance. And if you give it a toss, you can see how close you are. Like if you have it dead right, it's gonna glide, 20 feet or whatever it is. And if you don't, it's gonna doink into the dirt, or it's gonna kind of come up and stall out and come back down like porpoise, kind of come up and up, and like a gently, like a wave, kind of gently gliding to the ground. Like that's tail heavy. And you've done the same thing with probably your paper airplanes when you were a kid and didn't really know. Like you threw it and it went up and it stopped and it kind of went and it was gliding a bunch. It'd get a lot of speed and it'd stall out and it'd come up and it'd stall out and it'd go do it again. You're like, oh,
yeah, I remember my paper planes doing that.
Right. And then you're like, well, if I put a paper clip or I add a couple extra layers of paper on the front or maybe a piece of taper 3, all of a sudden it flies really well. It goes super straight. Like that's fixing that CG. And that's what the glide test helps you get. So it goes from going, I'm close to this is how it should be. Right.
Okay. But real concern here.
Mm-hmm.
I spent a lot of time building my plane.
Uh-huh.
And I don't want to doink it off the ground and break it before I ever get to spin the motor up and fly it.
Well, if you spin the motor and you don't have it right, it will likely be the last time you fly it. Unless you have to rebuild
I know.
it. Right. And this at least...
But at least I got to fly it.
But the glide test is usually, it's far more gentle. So you're less likely to do real damage to it. And you'll be able to tell the information you need to get it balanced properly. So the other thing is you want to check your location, right? Well, you can, if you have long grass, or you can toss it to a friend who can catch the model before it doinks into the ground, especially if you have it close. That's what you want to do. You want to set yourself up for a soft landing as a default. Like we've got fields with, tobacco and stuff, and they're pretty big, forgiving plants. If I'm doing a glide test, I go near the edge of the tobacco and kind of line it up. So I'm going across the tobacco and I just toss it and the tobacco will kind of catch it, or any kind of long grass at the end of a field that isn't mown. It'll catch your plane and it'll stop it from getting serious damage. So, I mean, that's what you want to do. You want to set up for success. Like Jesse and I did it where we tossed it to each other as best we could. I felt like I was going to spear him with the shape of the Dark Star.
Yours does come to almost a needle point.
Yeah, it's really kind of scary looking. But most planes don't. Most planes you can kind of just give a gentle toss and you can kind of see, how it's flying. And again, if it goes and kind of noses down in pretty quickly, like, shortly after you release it, it's probably has too much nose weight and you either need to take some out or move it back if you're using a battery for ballast. If it goes up and does the porpoise thing, or goes up and stalls out and goes down, gains speed, comes up again, stalls out, gains speed, and repeats until it hits the ground, like that means there's not enough weight in the nose. It's too tail heavy, and you want to add weight and try it again. And if you have it right, it's just going to glide straight, like a steady glide slope all the way down.
Okay.
Until either your friend catches it, the grass, it catches in the grass, and no harm because it's long, or you just take your luck and hopefully if it flies right, the ground will be fine. But that's you ultimately want to catch, throw it into stuff that's softer. I throw mine on the bed. Honestly, I throw mine across the bedroom if I'm inside, if it's rainy outside. It's a relatively small plane. I'll toss it across my bedroom and have it land on either a couch or the bed, because that's soft enough where it shouldn't damage much.
Okay.
But it'll tell me how it flies. It'll tell me if it's gliding, if it's tending to nose in, or if it's tending to stall out.
And when I go to do the glide test to make sure that I've got the weight right or close to right or whatever, Yeah, I need to have my motor mounted, my ESC present, the battery in it.
Yeah, you don't have to. Matter of fact, oftentimes if it's a really untrue, untested thing, I will, if you have the shape correct.
You can say no, Matthew. I was setting you up for that.
No, I know. The answer is no, you don't have to have all that stuff in it. As a matter of fact, the lighter the plane, the better. And the more you don't know about the plane, the lighter you want that plane to be when you do the glide test. So all you're doing is looking for that balance point. So if you can get that balance point without having the heavy battery and the heavy motors in it, it's going to do less damage if you get it wrong. So you want to try and do that with as light a weight as possible. Some things are not possible. Like sometimes the motors are already in there or something like where you can't, it's already kind of in the thing. The only way to balance it, like we had with the Dark Star, is either put the 1.5 or the 3-pound battery in the front, or we put a wallet and some keys and a heavy roll of tape up near the nose, which was less weight than the battery because it was further up, but we still had to make it kind of heavy. And I would have loved to have, if I had been smart enough, I would have done it without the batteries and without the landing gear in there. And that would have made it easier to balance lighter. And I would have risked less damage on that test. Also, if you can do it where it's very little wind. Like the wind is going to affect how it flies. So what you're looking for is where it should balance naturally. If you get that right, you can fly it in the wind. But if there's big wind, don't do the glide test because the wind's going to make it very tough to determine if that CG is correct.
Okay.
So you talked about location. Also, if you have the electronic sensor, like you have the servos in it, and you could at least use the control surfaces. Sometimes when you do a test, if you have those working, maybe you don't have a motor, right? But you can still power up the receiver with a little battery pack and the servos. You can at least toss it, and that way, when you do the glide test, you can at least keep it from rolling or change the elevator and stuff so it could actually, avoid doing any dramatic maneuvers that might damage it. You might be able to save it that way. So, and because it's going slow, you're not like powering it, it's not going very fast. You can set it up on high rates, so it has a lot of deflection. And you could use that to help you kind of figure out your CG and not crash the plane until you figure out the CG. But just remember that, you're not looking to fly it at that point. You're just trying to make sure it's balanced properly. Once you know where the balance is, you make sure all that stuff is back in it and balance it again on those points you found. And that way, when you're doing the glide test, you're not doing that with all the weight in it. That way you're less likely to have damage and you're less likely to doink it into the ground at full tilt, bust your motor, bust your prop, maybe damage a battery, definitely destroy your plane, and all that time and energy, that's the last thing you want to do. So this helps you set up for the first maiden flight to be successful. So I guess we can go through some of the basic list again real quick, because I think that's about all I have. Do you have anything you want to add to it?
I don't know how to frame this question, so I'm just going to say it. And I wouldn't know a whole lot about glide tests except I've been watching you. But, you chuck it, you see what it does, you move the weight forward, back, whatever. But once you get it right, pick your plane up and find where it's actually balancing. Because that's your CG point. That's where it should be. But if you just balance and it's like, okay, found it, and then you take everything out and don't mark anything,
Yeah. So what you should actually do is before you throw it, almost you could probably put even a masking tape with a marker on it, and then that's where you balance it. And every time you toss it, you can move that forward or back so that it's where you're balancing at the time. Because when you throw it, if it lands, whatever you're using for ballast will probably shift. Like the battery probably isn't in there solid because you're moving it around a bunch. True. Or I mean, I've had it where I'm literally sticking like 5 pennies and a nickel wrapped in a couple pieces of tape, just like slapped onto the nose, because that's all I need to know is where the balance is. I don't need it to be pretty. I don't need it to be like all, I don't need it to be secure. Really, I need to be secure enough where it's not going to move when I toss it. But if it lands, sometimes it lands abruptly, and the pennies go flying, and you're like, oh shoot, where was that balance again? Like, so you want to mark it before you launch it. And if it's successful, wherever that last placement was, that's your balance point.
Okay. And yeah, you could get like some wide packing tape or small painter's tape. If you do the clear tape, like a wet erase marker so it doesn't erase on impact or when you're touching it, but then you could wipe it off later.
Yeah.
Painter's tape, using a little pin to mark, and then I guess when you find the actual spot, just take a toothpick or barbecue skewer and actually punch it up through the tape.
Yeah, poke a small hole there.
And I've gotten to, I hadn't done it recently or with any recent builds, but something I was doing at the time was where the CG marks were on plans, I'd go ahead and put a little dab of glue.
Yep. That's what I was going to suggest.
Like I would, I could feel that dab of glue, and I knew that's where it needed to sit on top of my fingertips.
Right. And the other thing about that is if you have a divot and you put your fingers on the divot, you're balancing on the whole pad of your finger. If you're balancing it on the dab of glue, that glue is more of a fine point, and that point will be more near the CG. So instead of balancing on the entire pad of your finger, it's balancing on that little ball, which is more true to the true CG. So you're going to see a more accurate display of how your CG is. And we've talked about it before. CG, you should have your plane tilted a little bit nose down, no matter what way you're trying to balance it. You can flip over your plane, and if the CG marks are on the top, you could literally put your fingers on that mark on the top, and as long as that nose is coming slightly down, that's good, whether it's upright or upside down. As long as your fingers are on the CG mark and the nose is going just a little bit down, not parallel, but just a little bit out of that towards the nose, like the nose going a little bit down, and then it'll fly perfect. It should. It should at that point. And that means that when you do put in the electronics and get the maiden going, you're much more likely to have success out the gate. I mean, with the Dark Star, I was just ready to toss it into the dirt if I hadn't done that glide test. But when I did the glide test, I knew all I had to do is make sure that all the stuff was balanced, and so balance at that point. All the things were secured down, so they're balanced there. And I knew we'd have flight. I just didn't know if we'd get up in the air or not. And that was more because the motors were having trouble.
Right.
So, and one last thing, I think I didn't really specifically, but this kind of goes with every takeoff in an airplane, ever. It's the reason why when we were trying to fly the Parental D at Flight Fest, the wind was behind us and I couldn't get it in the air. You want to be throwing your model into the wind, whatever wind there is, if there's any. And you want to do it while you're like holding the fuselage. You don't want to, unless you're, I guess, throwing a wing, but you don't, if you're doing a glide test, you're not going to be throwing the wing by the wingtip. You can grab by the fuse and toss it that way. You're going to want to.
Have we ever discussed the reason for taking off into the wind, landing in the wind?
Because you're trying to be as slow as possible while having the highest relative airspeed over the wing. The slowest ground speed. Lowest ground speed while having the highest airspeed. The highest relative airspeed over the wing. So if the breeze is coming at you at 20 miles an hour and your plane's going 30, that means it's 50 miles an hour. And if your plane takes off at 50, then you're good to go. But if you have no wind, you're throwing it against the wind, with the wind, you'd have 50 plus 20, which means you're going 70 miles an hour to take off. And that's the only way to take off, which means that's a big difference in speed and it'll do significantly more damage at 70 miles an hour than 30.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you want to do is go ahead.
I was going to say, in a glide test, if you're trying to glide test with a tailwind, you're not going to really chuck it hard enough to overcome that tailwind. So it's just going to suck all the lift out of your wings.
Right. Yeah. You'll have unless it's a really lofty build, it's not going to, you're not going to get much out of it. It'll probably
even
just
if it's a lofty build. I mean, you're not able to throw them, but just how fast.
Yeah.
So even the old fogey, any amount of tailwind is going to suck the lift right out of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And that's another thing is even if you don't want to like toss it and you just kind of want to see how the plane is feeling, that's one thing you can do. You can also like walk or run into the wind, but still kind of hold on to the model and then feel how the plane is pulling on your hand. If you're holding it at the CG mark, if you run and it starts to lift, if it rotates forward, CG mark might be off, right? When you do that first glide test. But you want to feel how the air is working around and see if it wants to actually come out of your hands. So with most models, if you're running and you're running into the wind, you should feel the plane lighten in your hand. You're going to want to do the same process, again, set it up so it's going into the wind. You're going to want to run and you're going to want to firmly push it or launch it forward. I tend to do more of a dart throw rather than like a full like baseball throw. Baseball throw can be pretty dangerous if it goes sideways. Some people aren't good at it and will hold on to the plane a little too long and kind of launch it into the ground. That's never good. But generally, yeah, I do like kind of like a strong dart throw. And launch it forward, almost parallel with the ground. You want to aim it like a little bit up, and aim for a point off in the distance. Like you're kind of aiming for, 100 feet out, or what is that, 30 meters? And you don't want to throw it too high. So, because if you aim up too much, it'll actually stall out the plane. That's not what you want. You want to just pretty level. And you also don't want to put it into the ground. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. You want to, again, pretty level, little bit up from level. And that should give you the best chance for it to get gliding and give you feedback on if you have it correct. If you have the controls powered up, you can then use those controls to kind of keep it from doing anything dramatic. Because sometimes the plane will roll, for whatever reason. And if you have controls, you can actually kind of correct for that.
Okay.
If it starts nosing down, you could put some elevator in and maybe try to save it from nosing into the ground. So having the controls working can be very helpful. And then you basically want to rinse and repeat until you've got the CG right. So you're going to want to move it back and forth. What we talked about, and oftentimes, especially with like the little park flyers, and we're talking on the order of, if you're close, adding a nickel may make a difference. That's 5 grams. Adding 5 grams to the nose may be all the difference between going, this flies and going, there it is. That's the balance point.
Makes me wonder how many times my planes were just a little out of balance, and
I bet you
I chalked it up to
your building or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember your first one. You're like, oh, it's like that. I'm like, no, you had it close. If you'd put a little bit more nose in that, you would have, nose weight, and a couple ones where you said like, oh, I don't know. And you're like, no, I think you had it. Just, it feels weird to put a ton of weight in the nose. When you're sitting there like, geez, I think I'm adding like a whole pound in here. It's ridiculous. And then, but some planes, that's what you need.
It's all, what's it, angle of moments? What's the...
What do you mean?
The distance from your pivot point, the nose versus the tail.
Yeah, that's the moment arm.
Okay, moment arms.
Yeah, that's the distance.
Basically, the further out or the closer in. So things closer in require a lot more than things further out to apply the same force on your pivot point.
Right. They apply the same rotational force. So think of it's the weight times the distance. So if you have a tail out at a meter or at 3 feet or something, and it's, I don't know, we'll call it 10 grams at 1 meter, it's the same as having 1 kilogram at 10 centimeters or something. I'm totally not getting that right because I'm doing it on the fly. But basically,
that sounds about right. At a decimeter. Decimeter's 1/10 of a meter, so 10 times on the weight.
Yeah.
10 kilogram to 100 kilogram or whatever.
It's close, but basically they'd be equal, even though the moment arm, the distance from that rotational point, the center of gravity, is dramatically different. You know what I mean? So, and honestly, that's with structures. That's pretty much what we deal with all day long. It's not necessarily about a rotational point, but it's the same kind of deal. We're constantly balancing. Like as long as it all goes back to zero, as long as it's all balanced out, we're good. Things won't move.
There you go.
That's what we want with structures. If it's moving, something went wrong. With planes, you want it to be balanced about the center point so that when you make control surface changes, it moves the way you want to. And then when you're done, it stays put, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's about finding that balance. So, yeah. So the idea is, and that's the other thing with the glide test is it gets you to have success with that first flight a lot more reliably.
Mm-hmm.
And it also gets you to see, like, will this, especially if you're doing something that's crazy, like nobody's ever done this. It's like, will this fly? I don't know.
Give it a try.
That's the best way to try it and see if it has a shot. So cool. And then of course, if you're confident that the CG is where, and the glide test told you exactly where it is, you're like, okay, cool. Now I can paint it up because I'm pretty sure that when I launch it, it'll be a success.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're more excited about it. So, all right. Well, that was it. That's why I do the CG. That's why I do the glide tests, especially with the planes that I'm just not sure where the center of gravity is. When you have flight test planes, the CG points in the, and same with the Hangar RC, most commercial things, most balsa plans will have a CG that's very close. But I always at least try to give it a toss and see how accurate those are, because they're not always. Sometimes you're like, no, you need to pull out more weight than it looks, for it to fly right. And
right.
Maybe it's your build, right? It's possible. And it may be that they had that as their initial point and they never corrected it. I know I've done that on a couple plans that I've done where like I put the initial CG based on, and that's the other thing is if you're not really sure where to start, there are CG calculators online. Go to them, put in the details about your wing, and they will give you a general spot of where to start with your balance point.
Mm-hmm. Do we want to include, I know we've included the CG calculator 100 times, but we include that in the show notes.
We can do that. I'll have to see if I can find it. And then there's also the other method. There's like one other quick method, which is to figure out where the CG point is. You basically take whatever the chord on the outside, you put it in front and behind of the inside chord line, and then vice versa. You do the inside chord on the outside. So if you have a tapered wing, like if it's a Hershey bar, it's the same, right? And then what you do is you draw, I'm not going to describe it right, but you draw basically an X from the tips of those imaginary endpoints of the outside chords. And wherever they cross, that's your mean aerodynamic chord. So that's the average aerodynamic chord. And then what you want to do is the 25% from the leading edge. If your chord is 8 inches long, you're going to do 2 inches back from the leading edge at that point. That's your CG.
I know what it is you're talking about because I've seen a video discussing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I've seen the pictures. So, look at the CG calculator if you're not understanding what he's talking about there.
But that method really works.
Once you see it, yeah. Once you see it, it's not bad.
Yeah, and most of the time, it's basically like, it's not entirely if it's tapered, it's different. But if it's like a straight, constant width chord, it's pretty much wherever the high point is on that wing, that's more or less where your CG point is. You're just going to go like halfway out. If it's swept back, you're going to go halfway out. That's where the CG is. That's roughly where you want to put it. But again, double check with the CG calculator. You can double check with that little X method. Those give you really good starting points to test your CG. And then, you're going to fine tune it. Again, get out your pennies and nickels. And, they're cheap if you lose them in the grass. So you're not crying. A penny is 2.5 grams. A nickel is 5 grams. So that should give you kind of like how much. Again, when you're working with really, really small models, that's important. Like that's going to make a big difference. And when you're close, that's going to help you fine tune to be the optimal spot. So don't hesitate to pull them out and fine tune it, because you'll get a really great flying model as a result. Cool.
Okay. Well, anything else on glide tests?
No, go do one. Have fun.
I forget who it was. I tried to look back through the comments and couldn't find who it was that suggested this topic.
It was in a video. I actually just did a video of the Pan 240. I did a glide test. I did one in my bedroom, and then I went outside. And one of the comments was, "You need to do this as a topic in your." It was from Mike with the pink shirt.
Oh, okay.
I think Yankee something or other on our forums.
He must have made the same comment on your SR-72 video as well, because I know I saw it, and I didn't see that video you were referencing.
Yeah, and he just said, he's like, "Hey man, you got to make this a topic, because this is kind of important. It'd be good to know." I said, "Okay." I know we.
Well, thank you, Mike.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. I appreciate it. I think it's appropriate. I know we have covered it in bits and bobs through our past episodes, but it's nice that we kind of just cover it here.
Never as a dedicated topic.
Right. So, yeah. So good luck. Have lots of success and make crazy planes and see if you can make them fly. I mean, you saw the flying turtle. Like, nobody knew where the CG was on that. Right? At Flight Fest, that when you build those crazy builds, you're like, I don't know where the heck this would be. You take a guess. You kind of give it a toss between friends, see how it reacts, right? I mean, you saw the first throw of the SR-72, the nose went way up and the tail kind of came down. Well, clearly it needs more nose weight, right? So then we put more and it did less of that, but it wasn't enough. It's like, okay, so we added more. And I think if we had added too much, it would have started to sink faster. I said, oh, maybe we can reduce that, But as it was, we hit it right. But you can do that in that iterative process. It doesn't take but a couple launches. And again, if you have a friend to be able to toss it to, they can catch it before any damage happens. They can make sure it's a soft catch. And then you can go out in the field and fly it for real and have fun. It's important for the fun ones. So I guess that brings us back to our workbench, unless we want to talk about anything else.
No, that's it. I mean, I tried to put in a few of those noob questions in there that
I appreciate it.
I've had over the years.
Right?
So,
well, thank you, Joe.
And still have, because I still don't do glide tests.
I'm telling you, you need to fix that glider, and you need to do the glide test on that.
I'm not worried about the glide test on it. That glider flew perfect.
Okay, so you had it fine. Good.
Yeah, it was a bad day for, like, it was too windy and I put in a tree.
Nice. Well, good.
That's story of my life, bro.
Right. Fair. Hey, look, you've heard the stories of my life when it comes to airplanes and getting them going. So I feel your pain. Hey, so are you going to get working on that next? Is that on your list, or what are you working on now?
No, that glider's not even on my radar. I gotta sometime again. Eventually, I get the 7 out and fly it. But what's immediately on my radar is as soon as we end this episode, I'm pulling the micro SD card out of the Ender 3 and loading the fuselage for the Eclipse and Model B onto it so I can start printing that.
Okay.
1 day, 19 hours of printing. But that's for the fuselage pieces.
I will be crossing my fingers for you, my friend. There is nothing worse than 12 hours into a thing and it dislodges from the build plate.
I've not had that.
Good for you. I hope it never happens. It's happened to me. Where like a piece came up and it caught on the nozzle, and the nozzle was, it's going, whether you like it or not. And so it pulled the thing off, and then it all started moving around, and it's spaghetti from there on forward. I was like, oh man, that's like 12 hours into an 18-hour build. Oh, darn it. So you're going to do some 3D printing and HRC7, the Hangar RC.
Hopefully, if I can figure out when I'm ever going to get out. It's strictly limited to the weekends that I can even try to get out and fly at this point, and I've just had a lot going on the past couple.
Oh, hey.
Because I've got over an hour commute. So,
yeah.
But go ahead.
No, I was just thinking, the Hangar RC Design Build Challenge winners were announced. Did we cover that already?
We have not.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So for those listening, and I know all the people who were part of that journey were part of the announcement. But if you've been listening to us on the podcast, we've been talking about on and off. Sam finally got a chance from the Hangar RC to kind of go through the submissions and finally make the announcement. I say finally, but I mean, he's been doing the best he can do. He's really excited about what everybody put in. I think there were like 3 or 4 submissions per each category. There's a pro and the basic. And Tony won with his Crossfire prototype. And that was the basic build. And I think for the advanced build, it was our very own Richard, Spitfire 76 with his Bristol M1.
Well, congratulations to both of those guys.
Right. And look, congratulations to everybody who submitted. I know I had a couple submissions, I think one for each category. Tony did the same or something similar. We had Bush Pilot RC, which is Matthew Dupree. He had one, and 10745, who was building with us. And he actually pulled out his Spirit of St. Louis model, I think, at some point. But everybody there had put in a little something. And they were really excellent candidates. And so Sam kind of picked the most popular based on your voting. So if you went out and voted for these guys, and so thank you for doing so. And go take a look. Sam is putting together a page with all the things. I know if you go into our archive section of our Discord page, it'll be, now it's at the top. It's a 2022 Hangar RC Design and Build Challenge. Near the bottom of that list, on the 4th of July, basically, we have a set of pictures of all the candidates. So if you want to see kind of which one you might want to pull out and build, go ahead and do so. I urge you to do it.
That actually reminds me that I need to archive the Spitfire Squadron channel.
Yeah, be a good idea. So I'm going to be on vacation, but I'm hoping to finish up those 3 builds, right? The Dark Star, get the motor supports stiffeners in, so that way I can bring them up to full tilt. I also want to finish up the Payenne 240, the flying ambulance, get it painted up so it looks something special. It already looks really good. I'm so pleased with it. And get that flying now that I know where the CG is, because that's another one. That was the other thing. CG balance. A quick tip I learned from watching somebody else just doing their channel. They're like, I don't know where all the CGs are, but what I always do is 1 tire width in front or behind, depending on if you're doing a tractor or a tail dragger. Like if you're tricycle gear or a tail dragger, whatever the main gear is, on a tail dragger, it's right in front. to be like a wheel width in front of the landing gear. That's where your CG is, if it's an existing plane, right? And for tail draggers, it's a wheel width behind.
Okay.
So if you you look at the 3 view, if you see a landing gear on it and it's a plane that's flown, like it's a known entity, start there. If you don't know anything else about where it balances, start there. That's a good place. So,
all right.
I meant to put that in the main section. Darn it. All right. Anyway, so I'll be working on those things, and hopefully by the time we get back here to talk again, I'll have those flying, and I can tell you how they flew.
Okay. Well, anything else before we go?
No.
Okay. Well, then I will close this out. Guys, as always, thank you for tuning in and listening. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed listening to this conversation as much as Matthew and I enjoyed having it, and hopefully you learned as much as I did. As always, if you have any questions, thoughts, comments, concerns, anything along those lines, feel free to reach out to us. You can email us at aviationrcnoob@gmail.com. You can reach Matthew at aviationrcnoob.com, or you can reach me, Joe, at aviationrcnoob.com. You can swing by our Discord server. Link will be in the show notes. Join in. We have a bunch of guys hanging out and chatting and building and just having a good time. So feel free to join in with that. Swing by our Facebook page. You can follow there. Matthew likes to post new episodes there when they get going, or any sort of community announcements we tend to post there, as well as in the Discord. I think that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's enough. Again, if you can support us by sharing the word, please do. We appreciate it. And we look forward to talking to you next time.
All right. We'll catch you guys next time.